Hey guys, you've made it to Friday. Today is the 21st, and if you notice, the scenery looks a little different here. We have moved down the hall. We are in Mr. Potts's classroom. We like to kind of change it up a little bit, and wanted to introduce you to his room. He's really old, so he's been around a long time, so he has a lot of junk on his walls. Don't tell him we said that. Anyway, okay, so we are continuing our study of long division. You all have worked on this for several days now, and the other day you all did a page that looks like this in your folder. Both of these, it was where there was decimals on the inside, okay? Today we are going to go ahead and transition to the last part of our decimal division work, okay? So you're on the next page in your folder. It says just divide at the top, okay? But your first problem, they're not labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. They're labeled A, B, C, D, and so on. Your first problem should look like this, okay? It says 1.68 divided by 0.8, right? So if you need to, pause the video, get that yourself situated, make sure you're ready to go. So today we are doing decimal division still, but now you should realize that these numbers look a little different than what you've used before. You've always dealt with decimal on the inside, but now we are starting to move to decimals on the outside of your problem, which means you've got to do an extra step. It's not that much harder, you just have an extra step. Okay, so first thing we're going to do on problem A, it's written horizontal. So the very first thing I would encourage you to do is go ahead and rewrite the problem. So the 1.68 is your dividend, and it's being divided by 0.8 or 8 tenths. Okay? Now there's going to be a lot of rewriting of the math problems today. All right. So you've got your problem written correctly, and in the last video that we did the other day when we talked about it, if there was a decimal on the inside, you just moved that straight up into your answer and then did regular division. Okay. I always like to tell my kids, you're allowed to have decimals on the inside. That's okay. It is not okay. You cannot have decimals on the outside of a division problem. So if there's decimals on the outside, we have to do some work. All right? So very first thing we do, since we have decimals on the outside, we know that's not allowed. So we need to turn this decimal, it has to be made into a whole number. So we should know, if you remember from a couple weeks ago, you hear those dogs?
I won't shut the window.
Yeah, and dogs.
And while she's doing that, guys, this is me behind the camera. But if you're having trouble writing your problem and getting it set up, the number that's written first is always the dividend. So that's what's going to go inside the division house. So that might help you out if you're struggling with that.
Okay, so just to review real quick before we go trying to move things here, we talked the other day about whole numbers, like in the number 17, there is a decimal in that number. The decimal is behind it. In the number 354, there is a decimal there. It's just, we've taken it off and we've made it kind of invisible. The decimal is always at the end of a whole number, okay? So with that being said, we have to get rid of our decimal on the outside. You cannot have that. So in order to get rid of the decimal on the outside, instead of making it 8 tenths, we want to make it 8 whole. So to be able to do that, Mr. Winstead's doing some crazy camera work back there.
Yeah, I'm getting tired of holding it up. I'll have something I'll put my elbows on.
Okay. So in order to make 8 tenths, we have to turn that to a whole number. We don't want it to be 8 tenths anymore. We want it to be 8 whole. So we need to move this decimal. We're going to move it. If we move it one place, that would become 8.0. That's a whole number. So that's what we want. So we moved it one place on the outside. Whatever you do to the outside, you must do to the inside. So we got to move it one place here as well. Now, that looks messy to me. So I always tell my kids to go ahead and rewrite that problem. So now the problem has an 8 on the outside, 8 whole, because you moved the decimal once. In here, it moved from 1.68 to now it is 16.8. Okay?
And that right there should look very familiar to you from yesterday.
Yes. So now that we ask ourselves again, okay, decimals are in the inside, that's okay, we know that's allowed. We're not allowed to have decimals on the outside. Well, we don't have one, so we're good. We can go ahead and start our division work. So the very first thing Mr. Winstead told you to do yesterday was to take that decimal and you just stick it in your answer. Okay, once it's in the answer, we kind of ignore it. All right. So down here at the bottom, 8 does not go into 1. We know that. So we can put a 0 up here. 8 does go into 16. That should be a math fact. We know that 8 times 2 does give us 16. So we're going to take away our 16. 16 from 16, I'm left with nothing. Now notice, I'm ignoring that decimal. Mr. Winstead yesterday went ahead and erased it. You can erase it from here if you want to, once you put it up in your answer. Other people just leave it in there but ignore it, okay? So 16 minus 16 is nothing. We bring down one digit, which is an 8. Well, that should be, it's an easy math fact. 8 into 8, we know goes 1 time, and 8 times 1 is 8, so I'm left with nothing. So my answer is just 2.1, or 2 1/10. So, and again, you can go back and check your work if you would like. You know, you could do 2.1 times your 8, and it should give you 16.8 if we did it correctly. And you may use a calculator for your check step if you want. All right, Mr. Winstead, you good with that one?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Moving over to do one more example problem with you and then let you guys work. Okay, so this is B. It's not labeled 1, 2, 3. It's just labeled A, B, C. So this is 14 and 28/100 divided by 4 and 2/10. Okay. So again, the very first thing I do is just rewrite my problem. I would encourage you to not try to do too much in your head. Sometimes middle schoolers like to say, well, I'll go ahead and move that one there, and they get confused. So go ahead and just write it the way it's written originally. So we know it's 14.28 divided by 4.2. Okay, so again, I ask myself, okay, I got a decimal there. It's allowed on the inside. It is not allowed on the outside. So I'm going to have to move this to make it a whole number. So 4.2 is not a whole number. But if I move that decimal one place, it will create a whole number. So that becomes 42. Whatever I've done to the outside, you must do to the inside. So I moved it one place. So this problem becomes 42 into 142.8. So now, decimals on the inside, that's okay. No decimals on the outside, we're good, we're ready to work. So since the decimal's on the inside, we bring it straight up into our answer, and now we can kind of ignore it. So 42, I know doesn't go into 1. 42 times nothing is going to get me 14, so that's not going to work. So now I've got to get 42 into 142. Well, I don't know that math fact off the top of my head, so I do some scratch work over here. So 42 times something is going to get me close to 142. So I might have estimated. I know that, well, 4 times 3 would be 12, or 40 times 3 would give me 120. So I'm just estimating here. It's kind of a guess and check. So I'm going to go ahead and pick 3 to begin with. See what happens. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 4 we know is 12. So that's 126. That's fairly close. But I might check another one just in case if you're not 100% sure. So I might say, well, let's try 42 times 4. See what happens there. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 4 is 16. That's 168, so that's too much. So I'm going to have to use my 3. So 42 times 3 will work. And you just told us in our scratch work, 42 times 3 is 126. We're going to take 126 away from 142. If I have 2, I can't take away 6, so I've got to borrow. The 4 becomes a 3, the 2 becomes a 12. 12 minus 6, we should know is 6. 3 minus 2 is 1, and 1 minus 1 is nothing. Next step, you must bring down a digit. So 168. Well, because of my scratch work over here, I've made my life a little bit easier. I know that 168, I already figured that out. 42 times 4 got me exactly 168. So I'm left with nothing, and I've got nothing else to bring down. So my answer should be 3 4/10 to this problem. So you can see that it's a lot, it's not that much more complicated when you have decimals on the outside, but your work, it can get a little bit messy. So I would encourage having some scratch paper, you know, because even on mine, I don't know if you can see that. When I did the first two on my own a minute ago, I had to use the margin for my scratch work. So you may need another sheet of paper. You're welcome to use the margins that you've got. Okay? Just try to keep your decimal division fairly neat. Okay? So your job today, it's Friday, so you're going to, we don't want you to finish this whole page today because that's a lot of work when it comes to decimal division. So you're gonna finish the first 2 rows. Okay, so you're gonna do C through H, the first 2 rows today. Again, just like always, do your best work. Don't use a calculator, and you may put your answers into the Google form to check your work, okay, to make sure you're correct. Okay, if you guys have any questions, shoot us an email, and we will be glad to help you. We hope you have a good weekend.